Don't take another step. Down on the ground.
Officer, I understand you're responding to a burglary alarm nearby, but I am not involved.
You think you're gonna talk your way out of this? Quit arguing. Get on your knees.
I'm just walking home. Let me reach for my ID so you can see who I am.
Without warning, Officer Kessler seized Walker by the arm and violently yanked her sideways, throwing her off balance.
The suspect is resisting arrest. Ranger, get her!
The dog launched from the cruiser, covering the distance in seconds before its jaws clamped onto her arm and refused to let go.
Officer, please call him off!
Officer Kessler watched her a moment longer, as though he were deciding whether she'd earned it yet. What he didn't know was that every second he delayed calling off the dog only deepened the consequences waiting for him. Judge Audrey Walker walked home the same way every afternoon. Down Willow Court, past the old oak trees, past neighbors trimming hedges and waving hello. Court had let out early. Her feet were tired. Her mind was still on the case she'd heard that day. A man fighting for his job back after his boss fired him for the color of his skin. She thought about justice a lot. It was her job to think about it. For 8 years, she had sat on the federal bench. She signed rulings that changed lives. People called her Your Honor and stood when she walked into a room. Right now, none of that mattered. Right now, she was just a woman walking home in the bright afternoon sun. 2 houses down, an alarm went off. A shrill, cutting sound that sliced through the quiet street. She didn't slow down. It wasn't her house. She kept walking, briefcase swinging at her side, thinking about the errands she still needed to run. Tires screeched behind her. A patrol car swung around the corner fast, lights spinning red and blue even under the harsh midday sun. It skidded to a stop. A door flew open. "Stop right there!" Officer Gregory Kessler stepped out, one hand on his belt, the other pointing straight at her. Behind him, in the back seat, a German shepherd named Ranger paced and barked, scratching at the window. Walker stopped walking. She turned around slowly, hands lifting on their own, palms open. "Get on the ground! Now!" "Officer," she said, keeping her voice steady, "I haven't done anything. I'm walking home from work. I said get on the ground." Kessler's voice cracked through the street like a whip. He was young, younger than her own son, and his eyes had the wild look of a man who thought he'd caught something big. "There was a burglary alarm 2 houses back," Walker said. "I understand you're responding to that. I am not involved. I'm reaching for my identification now, slowly, so you can see who I am." She meant every word. She had spent her whole career telling people, police officers, lawyers, defendants, that words mattered, that how you said something mattered. She wasn't shouting. She wasn't running. She was doing everything right. But Kessler didn't hear a calm woman explaining herself. He heard a woman not obeying him. And in his mind, those were the same thing. "You think you're going to talk your way out of this?" he snapped, stepping closer, boots hitting pavement hard. "I don't care what you understand. Get on your knees, or I swear to God." "I'm not resisting anything," Walker said. Her hand moved toward the side pocket of her briefcase, slow and deliberate. "My ID is right here." Kessler's hand shot out and grabbed her arm. It happened fast. His grip was hard, yanking her sideways, trying to force her down to the ground. Walker's balance broke. Her body twisted, her free arm flying up on instinct, not to fight him, just to keep from falling flat on the concrete. "She's resisting!" Kessler shouted, loud enough for the whole street to hear, loud enough for it to be true in his report, before it even happened. "Suspect is resisting arrest." He didn't wait. He didn't think. He reached back and popped the door of his cruiser. "Ranger, fast!" The dog exploded out of the car like a bullet. Walker had 1 second to see it coming. Teeth, fur, 100 pounds of muscle moving faster than thought. And then pain tore through her arm as the dog's jaws locked down and did not let go. She screamed. She couldn't help it. The pain was white-hot, blinding, and she went down onto the pavement she'd refused to kneel on, dragged there by a dog that had been trained to hold on, not to stop. Front doors opened up and down the street. A woman watering her lawn dropped her hose. Someone's phone came up, recording. "Oh my God!" A neighbor's voice, distant, horrified. "Somebody call someone! He's got a dog on her!" Kessler stood over her, radio already at his mouth, voice tight, with something that almost sounded like excitement. "Dispatch, this is Unit 14. Suspect resisting arrest. K9 deployed. Requesting backup." Walker lay on the ground in the full light of day, blood soaking through her sleeve, teeth still buried in her arm, and looked up at the man standing over her like she was nothing at all. The dog did not let go. Walker lay on the hot pavement, her arm pinned in Ranger's jaws, and every second stretched longer than the one before it. 10 seconds. 20. She could hear herself gasping, could feel the dog's weight pressing down on her chest, could see Kessler standing over her, radio still pressed to his mouth, not calling the dog off. "Officer, please," she managed, voice shaking now. All the calm control from a minute ago burned away by raw pain. "Call him off. Call him off, please." Kessler didn't move fast. He watched her a moment longer, like he was deciding whether she'd earned it yet. "Ranger, ouse!" The dog released. Walker's arm dropped to the pavement, throbbing, blood already soaking through her sleeve and spreading across the concrete beneath her. She tried to catch her breath, tried to think straight through the pain, but her whole body was shaking. She would learn later, from a lawyer, from a report, from her own memory played back 100 times, that the bite had lasted nearly a full minute. Department policy called for release the moment a subject stopped resisting. She had never been resisting at all. Up and down Willow Court, front doors kept opening. A man in a bathrobe stood frozen on his porch, phone already recording. A woman across the street shouted for her husband to come look. "Come see this. Hurry." "She's not even moving," someone yelled. "Why's he still got the dog on her?" Kessler ignored them. He knelt down, grabbed Walker's uninjured arm, and hauled her onto her stomach. "Hands behind your back." "I need medical attention," Walker said, her voice tight with pain but still clear enough to be understood. "My arm is bleeding badly. I need hands behind your back." She gave them to him. There was no fighting this, not now, not with blood running down her fingers and pooling on the sidewalk. Kessler zip-tied her wrists tight, tighter than he needed to, and she felt the plastic bite into her skin the same way the dog's teeth had bitten into her arm. A second patrol car rolled up, then a third. 2 more officers stepped out, drawn by the crowd gathering on porches and lawns, by the shouting, by the dog still pacing near the car with blood on its muzzle. "What do we got?" one of them called out. "Suspect resisting a burglary stop," Kessler said, already reaching for his radio again. "K9 deployment, subject secured." Nobody asked her name. Nobody asked if she needed a doctor right away. She lay there, wrists bound, arm bleeding, listening to Kessler describe her to other officers like she was a thing that had happened to him instead of a person he had hurt. "Please," she said again, quieter now, mostly to herself. "Somebody just look at my arm." A neighbor, a woman named Diane from 3 houses down, though Walker wouldn't learn her name until much later, stepped off her porch and walked closer, phone still recording, voice shaking with anger. "You just watched that dog maul her for a full minute. She wasn't doing anything. I saw the whole thing from my window." "Ma'am, step back," one of the newer officers said, holding up a hand. This is an active scene. It's an active scene because you people made it one. Walker closed her eyes against the pain and against the sun beating down on the pavement. She focused on breathing. In, out. She had sat in her courtroom and listened to victims describe moments like this one. The confusion, the fear, the strange calm that settles in once the worst part is already over, and there's nothing left to do but wait. She heard sirens again, closer this time. Another car. She heard Kessler straighten up beside her, heard the shift in his voice as he turned to greet whoever had just arrived. Someone with rank, someone he needed to sound confident in front of. "Sarge," he said, "got a resisting suspect. K-9 deployment. Subjects secured now." Walker opened her eyes. A woman in a sergeant's uniform stood over her, scanning the scene. The blood, the zip ties, the crowd of neighbors with their phones raised, the dog still pacing by the car. Sergeant Remy Blair's eyes moved from Kessler to the wound on Walker's arm, and back again. "Get her up," Blair said. "Let's get this processed." They hauled Walker to her feet. Her legs wobbled beneath her, and pain shot up her injured arm the moment gravity pulled the blood downward. She didn't cry out. She'd already decided somewhere in the last few minutes that she wasn't going to give this street a show. She kept her spine straight and her breathing even as blood dripped steadily off her fingertips onto the sidewalk. "Name?" Blair asked, pulling a small notepad from her vest. "My identification is in my briefcase," Walker said. "I'd like you to check it, please." "I asked your name." "And I'm telling you where to find proof of it," Walker said, calm but firm. "I'm not going to shout it at you like I'm hiding something. Check the bag." Blair's jaw tightened. She wasn't used to suspects talking to her like that. Measured, direct, like she was the one being told what to do instead of the other way around. She glanced at Kessler, who shrugged like he didn't have an answer either. "She give you her name?" Blair asked him. "Wouldn't stop moving long enough to ask," Kessler said. "She was resisting the whole—" "I was not resisting," Walker cut in, voice sharp now despite the pain. "I told your officer I was reaching for identification. I told him I understood why he was here. I never once refused an order I understood." "You pulled away from me," Kessler snapped. "I was falling," Walker said. "You grabbed my arm and I lost my balance. That is not the same thing, and you know it." Blair held up a hand between them, more out of habit than real interest in settling the dispute. She'd have officers and suspects arguing at scenes like this every week. It rarely meant anything. She started patting Walker down for weapons, running her hands quickly and impersonally along her sides, her waist, checking pockets. "Anything on you I should know about? Needles? Knives? Anything sharp?" "No," Walker said. "Nothing. My briefcase is right there on the sidewalk. My identification is inside the front pocket." Blair finished the pat-down and straightened up. Something about the woman in front of her didn't sit right. She'd processed plenty of people who screamed their innocence, who cursed and spat and fought the whole way to the car. This woman wasn't doing any of that. She was standing there, wrists bound, blood soaking through her sleeve, speaking in complete, careful sentences like she was giving a statement she'd rehearsed 1,000 times in a courtroom. Around them, the crowd hadn't thinned. If anything, it had grown. More neighbors stood on lawns now, phones still raised, murmuring to each other, catching every word. She said, "Get her ID," one voice called out. "Why won't you just check it?" Blair ignored the crowd and walked over to the briefcase lying open on the pavement where it had fallen. She crouched down, unzipping the front pocket, glancing back once at Walker, who watched her without blinking. "It's right there," Walker said quietly. Top of the stack. Blair's fingers found a leather badge holder tucked just inside the pocket, the kind with a metal clip and a laminated card behind clear plastic. She pulled it out slowly, turning it over in her hand. Gold lettering caught the afternoon sun. United States District Court. Beneath it, a photo. Beneath that, a name in bold federal print. Blair's stomach dropped before she even finished reading it. She looked up at Walker, still standing there bleeding, still standing there straight-backed and calm despite everything that had just been done to her. And for the first time since arriving on scene, Sergeant Blair felt something close to real fear. "Kessler," she said slowly, not taking her eyes off the badge in her hand. "Come here." Kessler walked over, still riding the adrenaline of the last 10 minutes, expecting maybe a question about paperwork or backup. What he saw instead was Blair standing frozen, staring down at a small leather badge holder like it had teeth of its own. "What?" he said. Blair turned the badge around and held it up so he could see it clearly. Gold federal seal. A photo that matched the bleeding woman standing 3 feet away. And beneath the photo, printed in bold black letters that suddenly felt very loud, Judge Audrey Walker. United States District Court. Kessler's face went through several things at once. Confusion first, then disbelief, then something colder, something that looked a lot like fear trying to disguise itself as annoyance. "That's not," he started. "It's real," Blair said. "It's a federal ID." "It's real, Kessler." Walker watched the two of them from where she stood, wrists still bound, blood still dripping from her fingertips onto the pavement. She kept her voice level, even though every part of her wanted to scream at them both. "Sergeant," she said, "I need you to call your watch commander. Tell him Judge Audrey Walker of the United States District Court is currently in custody on Willow Court. Tell him I sit on the civil rights docket." She paused, letting the words land fully before continuing. "Tell him I have personally signed 3 consent decrees against this department in the last 4 years." The street went quiet. Even the neighbors with their phones raised seemed to lean in closer, sensing that something had shifted. Blair looked at the badge again, then at Walker, then at Kessler, whose face had drained of nearly all its color. "Cut her loose," Blair said. "Sarge, the report already says—" "I said cut her loose. Now." Kessler pulled a small knife from his belt and sliced through the zip ties with shaking hands. The plastic fell away, and Walker brought her arms slowly in front of her, wincing as blood rushed back into fingers that had gone numb from the tight bindings. She rubbed at the raw red marks on her wrists without a word. "Judge Walker, Kessler started, his voice suddenly smaller than it had been a minute ago. "I didn't know who you—" "That's not supposed to matter, officer," Walker said, cutting him off, her voice steady despite the pain radiating up her arm. "You don't get to bite whoever you don't recognize. That's the whole point of the badge you're wearing." Kessler had nothing to say to that. He looked down at the ground instead, at the blood pooled near his boots, at the dog still panting quietly by the cruiser, like none of this had anything to do with him. But something in the air had already changed. Walker could feel it. The shift from "she's a suspect" to "she's a problem." And problems, she knew from years on the bench, didn't just disappear once they were identified. They got managed. "I need this report corrected," Walker said, turning to Blair. "Right now, on scene, before I go anywhere. It cannot say I was resisting. I was not resisting." Blair hesitated. "Ma'am, I don't have the authority to amend a filed report without—" "It hasn't been filed yet. It's in his radio call and his notes. Fix it now, while the truth is still easy." "I can't authorize that without dispatch," Blair said, and for the first time her voice carried something like an apology in it. "I'm sorry. I need to run this up the chain first." Walker studied her for a long moment. She recognized the look on Blair's face. Not cruelty, not the same cold indifference she'd seen in Kessler's eyes, but something more familiar and more frustrating. A person following a system, even when the system was clearly wrong. "Then I want an ambulance," Walker said. "Not a squad car. An ambulance." Blair glanced at Kessler, who shook his head slightly, some instinct telling him to hold the line on at least one thing. "Dispatch is already routing a unit," Blair said carefully. "It'll be faster." It wasn't true, and Walker suspected it wasn't true the moment she heard it. But her arm was bleeding badly now, throbbing in time with her heartbeat, and she didn't have the strength left to argue every point on this sidewalk. She looked past Blair's shoulder, down the street, and saw a familiar car pulling up fast, hazard lights blinking. Elena had come. Elena Vasquez was out of her car before it had fully stopped, running up Willow Court with her heart pounding so hard she could feel it in her throat. A neighbor had called her 20 minutes ago, voice frantic, saying something about police and a dog, and Judge Walker's name all in the same breath. Elena hadn't waited to hear the rest. "Judge Walker!" She pushed past the edge of the crowd, past an officer who put a hand up to stop her, and then thought better of it when he saw her face. "Audrey, are you okay?" "Oh my God, your arm." "I'm all right," Walker said, though the tremor in her voice betrayed her. "I'm all right, Elena. Stay calm." Elena wasn't calm. She looked around at the scene. The blood on the pavement, the dog still sitting by the cruiser, Kessler standing off to the side, looking like he wanted to disappear into the concrete, and something hardened behind her eyes. "What happened here?" she demanded, turning to Blair. "Why does she still have blood running down her arm? Where's the ambulance?" "It's coming," Blair said. "It's coming, ma'am." "It better be," Elena snapped. Walker placed a hand, the good one, on Elena's shoulder, steadying her the way she'd done 100 times in chambers when a young clerk got too worked up over a case. "Elena, breathe. I need you clear-headed right now, not angry." Elena took a breath, nodded, and reached down to help gather the contents of the briefcase that had spilled across the sidewalk. As she did, Walker's phone slid out from a side pocket, screen lighting up with a string of notifications. Elena picked it up automatically, meaning only to hand it over, but her eyes caught the lock screen before she could stop herself. "Missed call. M. Talbridge, Office of the Deputy Chief." "Missed call. M. Talbridge, Office of the Deputy Chief." 2 calls. Both placed within the last 15 minutes. Both aimed at a phone that had no reason to be on Deputy Chief Talbridge's radar at all, unless someone up the chain already knew exactly whose arm that dog had bitten and was moving fast to get ahead of it. "Audrey," Elena said quietly, turning the screen toward her. "Look at this." Walker's eyes moved over the notifications, and something cold settled into her chest that had nothing to do with blood loss. She glanced over at Blair, who was speaking in low tones into her own radio a few feet away, and understood immediately what was happening. Word hadn't traveled up through Blair at all. It had already reached the top of the department some other way, faster than any official channel should have allowed. They were already managing this, before the ambulance had even arrived, before Walker's wound had been properly looked at. Someone in that department was already thinking about damage control instead of about the woman bleeding on the sidewalk. The ambulance finally turned onto Willow Court, lights flashing, and 2 paramedics jumped out and moved quickly to Walker's side. One of them took one look at her arm and swore under his breath, "Ma'am, we need to get this wrapped and get you transported right now. This needs stitches, maybe surgery." "I want the report corrected first," Walker said, even as the paramedic began wrapping gauze around the wound. "Ma'am, with respect, that arm can't wait on paperwork." Walker knew he was right. She let them guide her toward the ambulance, Elena walking close beside her, refusing to let go of her uninjured hand. Just before the doors closed, Walker turned her head and looked at Elena one last time, her voice low enough that only her clerk could hear it over the noise of the street. "Somewhere tonight," she said. "There's a report sitting in that department with Officer Kessler's name on it. It's going to say, I resisted arrest. It doesn't know yet, but that report is going to end up in my courtroom. Elena's eyes were wet, but she nodded once, firm and certain. I'll get the file first thing tomorrow. Every page of it. Start tonight if you can, Walker said. Don't let anyone touch it before we see it. The ambulance doors swung shut. Elena stood on the sidewalk as the vehicle pulled away, red lights fading down Willow Court, and looked back once at Kessler, still standing near his cruiser, still saying nothing. She pulled out her phone and started typing notes before she'd even reached her car. By the next morning, the video from Willow Court had already been viewed hundreds of thousands of times. Deputy Chief Mark Talbridge sat at the head of a small conference table inside police headquarters, a laptop open in front of him, the paused footage frozen on the screen. Ranger's jaws locked around a woman's arm, a crowd of neighbors shouting in the background. He'd watched it 4 times already that morning. He didn't need a 5th. Who else has seen this? He asked, without looking up. Everyone, said the officer sitting across from him, a public information aide named nobody bothered to introduce by full name in meetings like this. It's on every local station. National outlets are starting to pick it up, too. Talbridge closed the laptop slowly. He was 58 years old, 29 years on the force, and exactly 4 months from a city council vote that would make him the next police commissioner. He had spent decades building a record clean enough to survive that vote. He wasn't about to let one overeager canine handler and one very unlucky judge undo it in a single afternoon. Get me the incident report, he said. It arrived within minutes. Kessler's account, typed up the night before, describing a suspect who ignored commands and resisted arrest before the K9 was deployed. Talbridge read it twice, made a few notes in the margin, then looked up at the aide waiting across the table. We're not touching this, Talbridge said, tapping the paper. We're not deleting anything, not with cameras all over that street. But the story needs a frame. Right now the frame is cops sick a dog on a black woman for no reason. We need a different frame. Sir, the woman is a sitting federal judge. That's already public. People online have already... Then we don't confirm it, Talbridge said flatly. Not yet, not officially, until we control how it's said. By that afternoon, an official department statement went out to every major outlet covering the story. Walker, resting at home with her arm in a sling, and Elena seated beside her going through messages on her behalf, watched it appear on the local news broadcast with a growing tightness in her chest. Officers were responding to an active burglary alarm, the anchor read from the prepared statement, when a community member matching a general suspect description failed to comply with clear verbal commands. The K9 deployment followed department protocol, given the ambiguous nature of the individual's compliance. No mention of her name, no mention of her title. No mention that the community member had told the officer, calmly and clearly, that she was reaching for identification. They're calling me a community member, Walker said quietly, staring at the screen. Like I'm nobody. Like I wasn't standing there telling him exactly who I was going to be the moment he checked my bag. Elena's jaw was tight. They're doing it on purpose. If people don't know you're a judge, it's just another officer says, suspect says story. Nobody outside this department has to take it seriously. They're burying me before I've even said a word, Walker said. She sat with that for a long moment, arm throbbing beneath its bandage, watching the same 15-second clip of blurry porch footage loop on the screen without any of the details that mattered. She thought about every case she'd ever heard where a police department controlled the narrative before the truth had a chance to catch up. She had ruled against departments for doing exactly this. She had signed decrees ordering them to stop. And now it was happening to her. Elena, she said finally, sitting up straighter despite the pain. I want the full incident file. Every page. The initial call, the radio transcripts, Kessler's report, any body cam footage that exists, request it through the court, formally, today. They'll slow walk it, Elena warned. Let them try, Walker said. I know exactly how these files are supposed to be built. I've spent 8 years reading them for a living. If there's anything wrong with this one, anything at all, I will find it. Elena was already pulling out her laptop, fingers moving fast across the keys. I'll have the request filed within the hour, she said. Walker nodded once, eyes still on the television, on the words community member glowing across the bottom of the screen like a lie dressed up as a fact. 2 days after the department's statement aired, the porch footage found its way onto a national morning show. By then, the video had a name attached to it, whether the department liked it or not. Someone, a neighbor, a reporter digging through property records, nobody ever traced exactly who, had confirmed publicly that the woman in the footage was Judge Audrey Walker. The story exploded overnight. Hashtags, interview requests. A crowd of reporters camped outside the courthouse steps by sunrise. The pressure worked fast in one direction, at least. By noon, the department announced that Officer Gregory Kessler had been placed on administrative leave pending review. It was a small thing. Paid leave, not suspension. Still on payroll, still with his badge in a drawer somewhere waiting for him. But it was public, and it was something, and for a few hours it felt to Elena like maybe the truth had a fighting chance. That feeling didn't last long. Later that same day, Tallbridge called Detective Owen Faircross into his office. Faircross was 34, sharp, ambitious in the quiet way of someone who wanted to make detective sergeant before he turned 40, and knew exactly whose good opinion he needed to keep to get there. I want you leading the Internal Affairs Review on the Willow Court incident, Tallbridge said, sliding a thin folder across the desk. Yes, sir. Faircross opened the folder, scanning Kessler's report, the radio logs, a summary of the porch footage already circulating online. This department has a strong track record with K-9 deployments, Tallbridge added, not quite looking at him. Officer Kessler's been a solid performer. I'd expect a thorough review to reflect that his actions, given what he knew in the moment, were objectively reasonable. Faircross heard it clearly enough. Not an order. Never an order. Just a direction, laid out gently enough that a smart man could find his own way there without ever being told to. I'll be thorough, Faircross said, which wasn't quite agreement and wasn't quite refusal either. He started the review that afternoon, watching the footage from 4 different porches, reading witness statements, listening to the radio call over and over. Kessler's account claimed the suspect had actively resisted and pulled away aggressively before the K-9 was deployed. The footage didn't clearly show that. If anything, it showed a woman standing mostly still, hands raised right up until Kessler grabbed her arm. Faircross made a note of it and kept working. Meanwhile, Elena's formal request for the incident file had finally cleared the department's legal office. She sat at her desk that evening, going through page after page, the initial dispatch log, the radio transcripts, Kessler's typed narrative, comparing timestamps against her own memory of the night, against the messages Walker had sent her from the ambulance. Something didn't line up. The dispatch log showed the alarm call coming in at 4:12 p.m. Kessler's radio call requesting backup, the one calling Walker a resisting suspect, was logged at 4:19. All of that matched what Elena remembered, but the formal written report, the one with Kessler's signature at the bottom, the official document that would follow Walker through any court proceeding, carried a file metadata stamp showing it had been created at 4:20 p.m. and last modified at 1:47 a.m., 9 hours later, deep into the night. Hours after Walker had already been discharged from the hospital, hours after Tallbridge's press statement had already gone out calling her a community member. Elena sat back in her chair, staring at the screen, her pulse quickening. Somebody had gone back into that report after the story had already gone public and changed something. She didn't know what yet. The language, a detail, maybe just enough to make the resisting language hold up cleaner under scrutiny. But the timing told its own story all by itself. Nobody edits an official police report at nearly 2 in the morning, unless they're trying to fix something before someone else finds it broken. She grabbed her phone and called Walker immediately. "Audrey," she said the moment the line connected, "I need you to see something. The report, it was edited. Hours after everything happened. Hours after Tallbridge's statement went out." There was a long pause on the other end of the line. "Save everything," Walker said finally, her voice low and steady. "Screenshot the metadata. Don't let anyone touch the original file. Elena, this is the first real crack in their story. We treat it like evidence, starting right now." Elena arrived at Walker's house the next morning with her laptop already open. The metadata report pulled up on the screen before she'd even sat down at the kitchen table. "Look at this," she said, turning the screen toward Walker, whose arm was still wrapped in a sling but whose eyes were sharp and clear despite the pain. Created at 4:20 p.m., right after the incident. But the last modified timestamp says 1:47 a.m. That's 9 hours later, Audrey. Somebody went back into this file long after you'd already been discharged from the hospital. Walker leaned forward, studying the numbers carefully, the same way she studied evidence submitted in her own courtroom. Slowly, patiently, looking for the seam where a story didn't quite hold together. "This isn't just a sloppy report anymore," she said. "This is tampering with an official record. That's a different animal entirely." "Can we prove it holds up?" Elena asked. "I mean, prove it in a way that would matter if this ever went in front of anyone?" Walker thought for a moment, then reached for a legal pad on the table and began writing quickly with her uninjured hand. The court uses a specific authentication standard for digital evidence, the same one we use when someone claims a document was altered after the fact. Metadata timestamps, file hash values, edit history logs if the system keeps them. If we run this the same way we'd run it for a case in my own courtroom, it won't just be an accusation. It'll be documented fact. "I can start pulling the hash values tonight," Elena said. "I know the format the court uses. I've built exhibits like this before for other judges' cases." "Do it carefully," Walker said. "Document every step. If this ever needs to stand on its own, it needs to be clean enough that nobody can wave it away as a guess." Elena nodded and got to work immediately, running the file through verification software late into the night, while Walker sat across from her, arm aching, reading through Kessler's original written statement line by line, searching for the specific language that might have been the reason someone felt the need to go back in and touch it. At nearly 2 in the morning, they didn't go public with the finding. Not yet. Walker had learned patience a long time ago. Patience was often the only real advantage a person had against a system built to outlast outrage. She wanted to see what Faircross's official review would say first. If the department was willing to correct itself honestly, without being forced, that mattered. It would tell her something important about whether this was one bad officer or something bigger rotting underneath him. Across town, Detective Owen Faircross was working late, too, though for very different reasons. He had 3 witness statements spread across his desk, all from neighbors who'd watched the incident from their porches. All 3 described the same sequence of events. Walker standing mostly still, hands raised, calmly explaining she was reaching for identification, right up until Kessler grabbed her arm. None of them described her pulling away aggressively, the way Kessler's report claimed. None of them described any resistance at all. Faircross set the statements down next to Kessler's typed account and stared at the gap between them. He thought about Tallbridge's words from 2 days earlier, the careful, deniable suggestion that a thorough review would surely find Kessler's actions objectively reasonable. He thought about his own career, the promotion he wanted, the comfortable path that ran straight through staying in Tallbridge's good graces. He also thought about the footage, about the sound of a woman screaming on a public sidewalk in broad daylight in front of a dozen witnesses, none of whom had seen anything close to what Kessler described. Faircross opened his laptop and began drafting his report, typing slowly, choosing each word with more care than he usually gave this kind of paperwork. He wrote what the witnesses had told him. He wrote what the timestamps showed. He wrote, honestly, that Kessler's account of active resistance did not match the available evidence. Then he stopped, hands hovering over the keyboard, staring at what he'd written. He knew exactly what would happen if he submitted this version. He also knew what was expected of him instead. He saved the draft, closed the laptop without finishing it, and sat alone in his office a long time before he finally turned off the light. The email landed in Elena's inbox at 11 o'clock at night, sent from an address she didn't recognize, no name attached, just a single line in the subject field. You should see this before it's final. Attached was a PDF, Faircross's draft internal affairs report. Elena read it twice before she called Walker, and by the second read, her hands were shaking. The draft cleared Kessler completely. It described the K-9 deployment as within acceptable use of force parameters given the ambiguous compliance of the subject. It noted, almost in passing, that Judge Walker's account of events was inconsistent with the responding officer's testimony. Nowhere in the report did it mention the 3 matching witness statements Elena knew Faircross had collected. Nowhere did it mention the metadata discrepancy she'd already flagged through official channels weeks earlier. "Audrey," Elena said the moment Walker picked up, "they're going to clear him. It's all here in writing. They're calling your account inconsistent." The next morning, before either of them could decide how to respond, the police union got ahead of them. A statement went out to every local outlet, attributed to the union president, sharp and unapologetic in a way that made clear it wasn't meant to be diplomatic. "This department has a fine officer whose career is being destroyed because he had the misfortune of encountering someone with a judge's title," the statement read. Officer Kessler did his job. Now he's being smeared by a woman using her position on the federal bench to intimidate a working police officer who was simply trying to keep this community safe. By afternoon, the story had flipped. Comment sections filled with people questioning whether Walker had exaggerated her injuries, whether she'd used her title to bully an innocent officer, whether the whole thing had been staged to make a political point. It didn't matter that none of it was true. It mattered that it was loud, and it was everywhere, and it was working. Walker sat with the union statement open on her screen for a long time before she made a decision. She wasn't going to fight this in the press. Not yet. She was going to go straight to the one person on that street who actually knew the truth firsthand. She called Sergeant Blair directly, off the record, and asked to meet. They met at a small diner 2 towns over, far enough from Willow Court that nobody would recognize either of them. Blair looked uneasy the moment she sat down, hands wrapped tight around a coffee cup she wasn't drinking. "I'm not here to record you," Walker said gently. "I'm not here to trap you into anything. I just want to ask you one question, sergeant to person who was standing there. Did I resist arrest that day? Yes or no?" Blair didn't answer right away. She stared down at her coffee, jaw working, clearly caught between 2 versions of loyalty that no longer pointed the same direction. "You didn't fight him," Blair said finally quietly. "You didn't run. I saw the zip ties myself. I saw how tight they were on your wrists after everything was already over. I know what I saw. Then why does the union statement say I'm smearing an innocent officer?" Because that's not my statement, Blair said. That's not Faircross's report either, not the one he actually wrote first. Somebody above both of us decided what story this department is telling. Will you say that? On the record? Blair's hands tightened around the coffee cup. 22 years on the force. A pension 11 months away. A department that had never once, in all that time, forgiven someone for going against it publicly. I can't say all of that, Blair admitted. Not yet. I'm not ready to burn down 22 years over one afternoon. I'm not asking you to burn anything down, Walker said. I'm asking you not to lie. Blair didn't answer that directly. But 3 days later, when Faircross's finalized report landed on her desk for supervisor sign-off, the same version that cleared Kessler and called Walker's account inconsistent, Blair read it slowly from start to finish. Then she set down her pen without signing it. She didn't submit a correction. She didn't go to the press. She simply left the signature line blank and sent the report back up the chain unsigned. A small, silent refusal buried inside a stack of routine paperwork that nobody upstairs would notice for days. But it was there. A crack, finally, in a wall that had looked solid from the outside. The lawsuit arrived by courier on a Tuesday morning. A thick envelope stamped with the seal of Kessler's police union attorneys, addressed directly to Walker's home instead of her chambers. A small, deliberate cruelty meant to remind her that nowhere was safe from this fight anymore. Elena opened it at the kitchen table while Walker finished a phone call in the next room. By the time Walker walked in, Elena's face had already gone pale. "What is it?" "They're suing you," Elena said. "Kessler's union. Defamation. They're saying you used your position on the bench to orchestrate a smear campaign against him. They're asking for damages and a judicial conduct review." Walker took the papers and read them standing up, her jaw tightening line by line. The complaint was carefully worded, clearly written by someone who understood exactly how much damage a judicial conduct review could do even without ever proving a single claim. It didn't matter if the lawsuit ultimately failed. The accusation alone could trigger a review of her fitness to remain on the bench, could freeze her docket, could turn 8 years of careful, respected work into a headline about a judge abusing her power. "They're not just trying to protect Kessler anymore," Walker said quietly. "They're trying to remove me before this goes any further." For the first time since Willow Court, she felt something close to real fear. Not for her body this time, but for the seat she'd spent her whole career earning the right to sit in. She called Elena and Blair together that evening, laying everything out on the kitchen table. The metadata proof of the tampered report, Blair's refusal to sign Faircross's finalized findings, the pattern that was starting to take shape. It wasn't enough yet. Not for what she needed. "I think it's time we go to the U.S. Attorney's office," Walker said. Elena had already reached out quietly, feeling out interest before any formal ask, and secured a meeting with U.S. Attorney Penny Nelson for the following afternoon. Nelson's office was small and cluttered with case files, and she listened to Walker's account with a careful, guarded expression that gave away very little. Nelson was ambitious in her own right, well aware that going after a police department carried real risk to her own career in a system that closed ranks fast and hard around its own. "I understand what happened to you was wrong," Nelson said when Walker finished. "But indicting a department, or even opening a formal federal review, isn't something I do lightly. These cases are political minefields. They cost careers. Sometimes mine. This isn't about what happened to me anymore," Walker said. "This is about a falsified official record, altered 9 hours after the fact, timed exactly to match a press statement. That's obstruction. That's tampering with evidence connected to an active complaint against a sitting federal judge. If I let this go because it's inconvenient, I'm no better than the people who buried it." She slid the metadata report across the desk. Nelson studied it in silence for a long moment, running her thumb along the edge of the page. "And the sergeant?" Nelson asked. "Blair. Will she talk?" "She wouldn't sign the false report," Walker said. "That's not nothing. She's not ready to go public yet, but she didn't lie for them either." Nelson sat back in her chair, weighing all of it. The risk, the evidence, the pressure that would come from every direction the moment this became official. She'd built her career being careful. This wasn't careful. This was the kind of case that either made a prosecutor's reputation or ended it. "I'll open a preliminary federal review," Nelson said finally. "Quietly, for now. I'm not promising an indictment. I'm promising I'll look, and I'll look honestly, and I won't let anyone bury what I find." It wasn't everything, but it was more than Walker had a week ago, and she left the office that afternoon with something steadier in her chest than she'd felt since the moment Ranger's teeth had closed around her arm. Outside, walking to the car, Elena finally let herself breathe. "They're going to fight this hard," Elena said. "The Union, Talbridge, all of it." "I know," Walker said. "But now there's a federal prosecutor looking at the same file we are. That changes the math for them. People who cover things up count on nobody ever checking their work." She looked back once at the courthouse behind them, the same kind of building where she'd spent 8 years handing down rulings against departments just like this one, and felt, for the first time, like she was finally standing on the right side of the fight from both directions at once. The email came in the middle of the night, sent from a personal account instead of a Department one. No subject line at all. Elena saw it first, scrolling through her phone at 2 a.m, unable to sleep with the countersuit hanging over everything. She opened it out of habit more than hope. Her breath caught. It was an internal email chain, forwarded whole, no explanation attached. She didn't need one. The messages were dated the day after Willow Court. The sender was Deputy Chief Mark Talbridge. The recipient was a name she recognized from records requests, the department's Records Division Supervisor. "The Kessler report needs to be cleaned up before this becomes a bigger problem than it already is," one message read. "Language on compliance needs adjusting. Handle it tonight." Further down the chain, another message, older, referencing 2 other names Elena didn't recognize. 2 other K-9 complaints, both settled quietly years earlier. Both with confidentiality clauses attached, both personally signed off on by Talbridge himself. This wasn't one bad night. This was a pattern, and Talbridge had been managing it for years. Elena called Walker immediately, reading the emails aloud over the phone with her voice shaking. By morning, they had a name attached to the leak. Detective Owen Faircross, the only person with the access and the reason to have found all of it, though he'd sent it without a single word explaining why. Walker brought everything to Nelson that same day. The metadata proof, Blair's unsigned report. Now this, direct, written proof that Talbridge himself had ordered the falsification, along with years of buried complaints against the same department. "This is enough," Nelson said, reading through it a second time. "This is more than enough. I want to move on an indictment recommendation for Talbridge. Obstruction, at minimum. Possibly a broader civil rights conspiracy charge given the pattern." For the first time in weeks, Walker allowed herself to believe it might actually be over soon. She sat in Nelson's office that afternoon watching the pieces line up. Years of misconduct finally catching up to the man who'd spent his career burying it, and felt something close to relief settle into her chest. It didn't last through the night. Nelson called her at 9 the next morning, voice tight and clipped in a way that told Walker something had gone wrong before a single word was spoken. "Faircross is gone," Nelson said, "reassigned overnight to a fusion center 3 states away. Effective immediately. I don't know how they moved that fast unless someone tipped them off that we had the emails. Walker's stomach dropped. Tipped off from where? I don't know yet, Nelson admitted. And the admission itself was its own kind of warning. Maybe someone in my office. Maybe someone in records who noticed the file access. I don't know. What I do know is Faircross is unreachable now. And without him confirming he's the one who sent those emails, a defense attorney will tear the authenticity apart in about 4 seconds. The emails are still real, Walker said. Real doesn't matter if we can't prove where they came from, Nelson said. Right now, they're anonymous documents from an anonymous source that conveniently vanished the same week we needed him. Before Walker could respond, her phone buzzed with a second call coming in. Her own attorney, retained weeks earlier to handle the union's defamation countersuit. They fast-tracked a hearing, he said, voice grim. Tomorrow morning. They're asking for an emergency gag order. If it's granted, you can't speak publicly about your own case at all. Not to press, not to anyone, until the countersuit is resolved. Walker sat down slowly at her kitchen table, the weight of it landing all at once. Their one internal witness, gone. Their strongest piece of evidence, suddenly unprovable, without him. And now, less than 24 hours away, a hearing that could silence her completely at the exact moment she needed her voice the most. Elena arrived within the hour, laptop already open, scrolling frantically through the leaked email chain like she could will it back into usefulness through sheer effort. Without Faircross, these are worthless, Elena said finally, defeated. We can't authenticate them. Nelson's right. Any lawyer would shred this in court. Walker sat very still, staring past her at nothing in particular, running through everything they had gathered over the past weeks. The union statement, the countersuit, the emails, the metadata. Then we don't need Faircross, she said slowly. Elena looked up. What do you mean? We need the report, Walker said. Kessler's report. His signature is on it. His timestamp is on it. That metadata I asked you to authenticate weeks ago, using the same standard my own court uses to verify evidence, that report can't be reassigned to a fusion center. That report doesn't need a witness to speak for it. She stood up, arm still stiff beneath her sleeve, and reached for her coat. We have until tomorrow morning, she said. Let's get to work. They worked through the night. Elena sat at the kitchen table with 3 laptops open in front of her, running the authentication software the federal courts used for digital evidence. The same process Walker had walked juries through a dozen times over the years when a defense attorney claimed a document had been altered. It wasn't complicated once you knew where to look. It was patient work, careful work, the kind of work that didn't care who you were or what department you belonged to. Walk me through it again, Walker said, leaning over her shoulder despite the ache still radiating through her arm. Slowly. I want to understand every piece before we walk into that courtroom. The report's metadata shows 2 timestamps, Elena said, pulling up the file properties on screen. Created at 4:20 p.m., the same day as the incident. That matches. But modified at 1:47 a.m. That's the piece that matters. I ran the file hash from both versions. They're different. Something inside that document changed between creation and that early morning edit. Can you show what changed? Not just that it changed. Elena nodded, pulling up a side-by-side comparison, the kind of exhibit Walker had seen submitted 100 times in her own courtroom. The original creation draft, recovered from a cached version still sitting on the department's server, describes the subject as stationary, hands raised. The final version, the one filed the next morning, says subject pulled away and resisted verbal commands. Someone rewrote the compliance language hours after the fact, hours after Tallbridge's press statement already called you ambiguous. Walker read through both versions twice, feeling. Something settled into place inside her chest. Not relief, exactly, but the particular calm of finally holding proof instead of suspicion. "This doesn't need Faircross," she said quietly. "This doesn't need anyone to testify to anything. The document is telling on itself." She picked up her phone and called Nelson, even though it was well past midnight. Nelson answered on the second ring, sounding like she hadn't slept either. Walker explained everything: the recovered draft, the hash comparison, the exact standard the federal courts used to authenticate documents just like this one. There was a long pause on the line. "If this holds up under review," Nelson said slowly, "we don't need Faircross to authenticate anything. The report authenticates itself." "That's a completely different case than the one I thought we lost last night." "Can you have someone verify it independently before morning?" Walker asked. "I don't want to walk into that hearing with anything less than certainty." "I'll have my own digital forensics analyst run it the second the sun's up," Nelson said. "But Audrey, if this checks out, this isn't just about Kessler anymore." Rewriting compliance language after a press statement already went out isn't sloppy paperwork. That's obstruction, directed from somewhere above him. That's Tallbridge's fingerprints all over an official record. "I know," Walker said. "That's exactly why I need it to be airtight." By 6 in the morning, Nelson's analyst had confirmed everything independently. The same hash mismatch, the same 9-hour gap, the same rewritten language. It wasn't a leaked email anymore, vulnerable to questions about where it came from or who might have doctored it. It was an official police record, examined the same way federal courts examined evidence every single day, proving on its own that someone inside that department had falsified it after the fact. Elena finally shut her laptop just as the sun came up over the kitchen window, exhaustion pulling at her eyes, but a fierce, quiet triumph in her voice. "We don't need a witness," she said. "We have the file. The file is the witness." Walker stood at the window, watching the light spread slowly across Willow Court in the distance, the same street where all of this had started. She thought about Kessler's hand grabbing her arm. She thought about Ranger's teeth. She thought about lying on that pavement, bleeding, listening to a young officer describe her like she was nothing at all. None of that had broken. Not really. She turned away from the window and picked up her coat. "Let's go," she said to Elena. "Nelson's meeting us at the courthouse in an hour. We have a gag order to stop and a much bigger case to open." The courtroom was packed by 9 that morning, reporters filling every bench along the back wall, phones confiscated at the door, but notepads flying across half the room already. Kessler's union attorney stood first, a tall man named nobody bothered to identify beyond his title, his voice smooth and practiced as he laid out the case for an emergency gag order. "Your Honor," he said, addressing the presiding judge, "Judge Walker has used her position and her public platform to wage what amounts to a campaign against Officer Kessler. Every statement she makes to press, every public appearance, further poisons any chance of a fair resolution to our client's defamation claim. We're asking this court to bar her from further public comment until this matter is resolved." Walker sat beside her attorney, spine straight, hands folded, saying nothing. She had learned a long time ago that silence, in the right moment, said more than any outburst could. Penny Nelson rose next, a thin folder in her hand. "Your Honor, before this court considers silencing a sitting federal judge," Nelson said, "I'd like to enter something into the record. This isn't argument. This is evidence, independently authenticated by federal forensic standards, regarding the original incident report filed by Officer Gregory Kessler on the night in question." The presiding judge raised an eyebrow, waving her forward. Nelson approached the bench and laid out the comparison. The original cached draft describing Walker as stationary, hands raised, and the version filed the next morning claiming she had resisted verbal commands, along with the metadata proving the document had been altered at 1:47 a.m., 9 hours after the incident, hours after the department's own press statement had already gone out. A murmur rippled through the courtroom. Reporters' pens moved fast. This report, Nelson continued, was falsified after the fact to support a narrative that had already been publicly released. That is not a disputed opinion, Your Honor. That is a documented, verifiable fact, entered today as evidence in this proceeding. The union attorney rose, objecting, arguing relevance, arguing this had nothing to do with the gag order request. But the damage, if it could even be called that, was already done. The moment Nelson finished reading the metadata into the record, it stopped being a leaked rumor floating around online. It became part of a federal court filing, public, permanent, citable by any reporter in that room the second the hearing ended. The presiding judge studied the documents for a long moment, then looked up over her glasses at the union attorney. "You're asking me to silence a judge," she said, "on the basis that her public statements are damaging your client's reputation. While evidence entered this morning suggests the official record your client relied on was altered after the fact to protect a false narrative. I don't see how gagging Judge Walker changes any of that. Motion for emergency gag order is denied." The union attorney sat down without another word. Walker felt something loosen in her chest for the first time in weeks. Not victory exactly, but the particular relief of watching a weapon meant for her hand break in someone else's grip instead. In the gallery, Sergeant Remy Blair sat near the back, arms crossed, watching everything unfold in silence. She had come on her own, off duty, telling no one at the department where she was going that morning. When the hearing ended and the crowd began filing out, she approached Nelson quietly in the hallway. "I'll testify," Blair said, before Nelson could even ask, "for the Federal Review. Everything I saw that day. The zip ties, the length of the bite, the ambulance he refused to call. All of it. You understand what that means for you inside the department," Nelson said. "I understand what staying quiet meant too," Blair said. "I already made that choice once, when I refused to sign Faircross's report. I'm not backing away from it now." Nelson's phone buzzed in her pocket as they spoke. She glanced down at the screen, then looked up at Walker across the hallway with an expression that carried real weight behind it. "Grand jury just came back," Nelson said, walking over. "They've cleared the indictment. Tallbridge. Obstruction of justice, civil rights conspiracy, tied to the report tampering, and the pattern of buried complaints." Walker stood very still for a moment, letting the words settle fully before she let herself believe them. "When?" she asked. "Today," Nelson said. "This afternoon, if the marshals move fast enough." By 2 o'clock that afternoon, federal marshals were already moving. Walker stood at the window of her chambers, still in the same clothes she'd worn to the morning hearing, watching the courthouse plaza below fill with reporters who had gotten word faster than anyone expected. News of the indictment had leaked within the hour. Nobody could keep something like this quiet for long. Not anymore. Not after everything that had already been dragged into daylight. Elena stood beside her, phone pressed to her ear, relaying updates as they came in from Nelson's office. "They're bringing him in now," Elena said. "Tallbridge. He was called into headquarters for what he thought was a budget meeting." Marshals were waiting. Walker watched from her window as a dark sedan pulled up in front of the courthouse steps below. The same steps she'd climbed 1,000 times over 8 years. The same building where Tallbridge had once believed a carefully worded press statement could bury a truth that refused to stay buried. He stepped out of the car, flanked by 2 federal marshals, hands cuffed in front of him, his face a careful mask that couldn't quite hide the tightness underneath. Cameras surged forward. Questions flew from every direction. He said nothing, kept his eyes forward, and let himself be walked up the very steps he'd spent 29 years climbing on his way to a promotion that would never come now. "Deputy Chief Tallbridge," a reporter shouted, "did you order the falsification of Officer Kessler's report?" He didn't answer. He never would. Not publicly. Not with federal obstruction and civil rights conspiracy charges now sitting on his record. Not with a defense attorney somewhere already advising him that every word mattered from this point forward. Walker watched it happen from above, close enough to see it clearly, far enough that it felt like watching something finally close a circle that had opened on a sidewalk on Willow Court weeks earlier. She didn't feel joy exactly. She felt something steadier than that, the particular satisfaction of watching a system, slow and stubborn as it was, finally do the thing it was supposed to do all along. Kessler's news came within the hour. Quieter. No marshals, no cameras waiting outside his front door. A formal notice arrived instead, delivered by department courier. His badge revoked effective immediately. His certification suspended pending a separate federal indictment for falsifying official police records tied directly to the report Elena had spent weeks authenticating. His name would be entered into the state's police decertification registry before the week was out. A permanent mark that would follow him to any department in the country that might have considered hiring him again. He would never wear a badge anywhere, ever again. Walker learned this from Nelson over the phone that evening, sitting at her kitchen table with Elena across from her, both of them still processing everything that had happened in the span of a single day. "There's something else," Nelson said. "The union statement, the countersuit. Kessler's attorneys withdrew the defamation claim against you an hour ago. No formal announcement. Just gone." Walker closed her eyes for a moment, feeling the weight of it finally lift off her shoulders. The threat that had hung over her judicial seat for weeks. The accusation that she'd abused her power. All of it dissolving the moment the truth became too large and too documented to argue against anymore. That night, the news coverage looked entirely different than it had on the day of the incident. No more community member. No more vague language about ambiguous compliance. Every outlet now used her full name and title, correctly, prominently, alongside images of Tallbridge's arrest and Kessler's revoked certification. The story that had once been scrubbed clean of her identity now couldn't be told any other way. Elena sat beside her on the couch, watching the coverage loop on the television, exhaustion and relief mixing together on her face. "It's over," Elena said quietly. Walker looked at the screen a long moment, at Tallbridge's face frozen mid-arrest, at Kessler's badge number scrolling across the bottom in a graphic about the decertification registry. "The worst of it is," she said, "but it's not really over yet. Not until something changes, so this can't happen to the next person who walks down that street." She thought of Blair, still inside that department, still wearing the uniform, still believing, despite everything, that it could be better than this. Tomorrow, she decided, she would start on that. 3 days after the arrests, the department announced a new reform unit, formed under direct federal oversight as part of an expanded consent decree. Sergeant Remy Blair was named to lead it. Walker read the announcement at her kitchen table, coffee going cold beside her, and felt something rare settle into her chest. Not triumph exactly, but the quiet satisfaction of watching a person choose the harder right thing and get rewarded for it instead of punished. Blair had risked her pension, her 22 years, everything she'd built, the moment she refused to sign a false report. Now she'd be the one deciding how K-9 units were trained, how force complaints were reviewed, how officers like Kessler got stopped before they ever got the chance to become Tallbridge's next problem to bury. That same week, lawyers representing the department reached out with a settlement offer. A quiet number, generous enough to make most people sign without a second thought, attached to a confidentiality clause that would keep every detail of the countersuit and its collapse permanently sealed. Walker read the offer once and set it aside. "They want this to disappear quietly," she told Nelson over the phone. "I'm not interested in quiet." Instead, she asked for something the department's lawyers hadn't expected. Not money. Not an apology delivered in a press release nobody would remember by next month. She wanted the case folded directly into the existing consent decree, the same legal mechanism Tallbridge had tried to escape by falsifying a report in the first place, expanded now to include mandatory reform of K-9 deployment protocols, independent review of every force complaint filed in the last 5 years, and oversight that answered structurally through the very federal court Walker sat on. Nelson filed the amended terms within the month. A judge, not Walker, since recusal was the only honest choice left to her now, signed off on the expansion, and just like that, the department that had once let a dog tear into her arm on a public sidewalk found itself permanently bound to answer for it, not just once, but for years to come. On a warm afternoon a few weeks later, Walker walked home from court the same way she always had, down Willow Court, past the old oak trees, past neighbors trimming hedges who waved at her now with a different kind of recognition than before. Not curiosity, not pity, just quiet respect for a woman who'd stood on this same pavement and refused to let it be the last word on who she was. A patrol car passed slowly on the street, one of the new community oversight units created under the expanded decree. An officer at the wheel who nodded to her through the open window. She nodded back. It didn't erase what had happened here. Nothing ever could. Not fully. Her arm still ached sometimes when the weather turned, a permanent reminder stitched into her skin where Ranger's teeth had closed down and refused to let go. But the street felt different beneath her feet now. Not because the concrete had changed, because everything standing on it had. She thought about Kessler, decertified, his name permanently marked in a registry that would follow him the rest of his life, unable to ever wear a badge again anywhere in the country. She thought about Tallbridge, awaiting trial, his 30 years of careful reputation reduced to a single indictment that would define whatever came next for him. She thought about Faircross, reassigned but not silenced, quietly cooperating now with federal investigators from a fusion center 3 states away, choosing, eventually, imperfectly, but choosing all the same, to tell the truth when it mattered most. And she thought about Elena, who had believed her from the very first phone call, who had spent sleepless nights chasing metadata and timestamps until a falsified report finally told on itself. Walker reached her front steps and paused, the late afternoon sun warm against her face, the same light that had been shining down on this street the day everything had gone wrong. She looked back once at Willow Court, quiet now, ordinary now. No crowd, no sirens, no dog straining against a leash. Just a street, just a woman walking home. She turned and went inside as the sun began to set behind her, and somewhere behind that closing door, the fight that had started here finally, fully, belonged to the past. If you enjoyed the story, leave a like to support my channel, and subscribe so that you do not miss out on the next one. On the screen, I have picked 2 special stories just for you. Have a wonderful day.